and welcome to another episode of Second Gen Liberated Panda. I'm joined today by a very special guest from Australia. His name is Dr. Malcolm Davis. He worked for the Australian Department of Defence from 2007 to 2012, including as Assistant Director, and he went on to be part of the Strategy Policy Division. His expertise include Chinese military modernization, space policy, space security, future warfare, and military technology. He is currently with the Australian Strategy Policy Institute.
Dr. Malcolm Davis is an expert in defence strategy with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and joins us now live from Parliament House in Canberra. Dr. Davis, there's no agreement as yet, of course, but we've already done joint patrols with Indonesia in the Timor Sea, for example. The unknown here is how China will react. It could prove pretty provocative, couldn't it?
Well, it's not designed to be provocative. It's designed to uphold international law and freedom of navigation of the seas. And certainly I think the Indonesians have justifiable cause for concern regarding the Natuna Islands, where China's declared 9-dash line in the South China Sea overlaps the economic exclusion zone around those Indonesian islands. And there's been a number of incidents between Chinese fishing fleets that have been fishing illegally in those islands, around those islands, and Indonesian coastal patrol vessels. So I think these patrols between Indonesia and Australia are a good thing. They send a strong message to China that the region will not tolerate China encroaching on other people's territory or their territorial waters. And I think they are upholding international law.
Hello, Malcolm, and thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to have you here.
Thank you, Angel, and it's my pleasure to join you.
So, Malcolm, before we dive headfirst into the heavy stuff, would you kindly provide our viewers a little bit about your background, your career, what motivated you to join the Australian Department of Defence, and then later transition to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute?
Well, essentially I'm a strategic analyst, and I've always had a fascination with international affairs and defence and national security. So after finishing my undergraduate degree, I decided let's pursue that. And I went into a couple of postgraduate degrees before doing my PhD. And my initial thought had been to focus very much on academia as a career. And I spent 10 years at King's College London in the UK as a lecturer in defence studies. But then I realised I needed to get some actual policy experience. So that's why I went into Department of Defence, and that was a great experience for me for 5 years working in Department of Defence. But having sort of come from academia, I did feel that in defence I wasn't allowed so much to shape the public debate. So I went back into academia for a period and then ended up in ASPI, which is Australia's leading think tank on defence and national security affairs. I've been there since 2016 and I really enjoy it. It's a great middle ground between academia and the government environment. And I get to engage with policy leaders and help shape policy, but I also get to engage with the public, including through media such as this.
Wow, congratulations on an amazing and illustrious career. So we're very honored to have you here with us today. Given your expertise in both strategy, capability development, and Chinese military modernization, and given Australia's physical proximity to China, one would imagine Australia and China have a strong relationship that has recently been somewhat deteriorating, it seems. Whether the relationship is good, bad, or somewhere in between is something that I would love to discuss with you. So given the deteriorating relationship, I was hoping you would share your thoughts on the China-US relationship in general, and in addition to that, what your take is on the Yang Hechun trial and the Teng Lei national security case. By the way, for those of us in our audience that are unfamiliar with these two cases, both cases are high-profile Chinese Australians who were taken hostage by Beijing amid deteriorating Sino-Aussie relations.
Well, thanks, Angel. Look, yes, the relationship between China and Australia has been deteriorating for a number of years. And I think that's in part an outcome of a broader deterioration in the relationship between China and the United States. I think we are in a period of strategic competition between Beijing and Washington, D.C. And that's resonating right around the Indo-Pacific region, including affecting Australia. And I don't see this competition ending anytime soon. I think that both the United States and China have diametrically opposed visions of the future world order. The US, of course, promotes Western liberal democracy, freedom, a rules-based international order. China, under Xi Jinping, seems to be promoting an alternative of authoritarianism, what they would call authoritarianism with Chinese characteristics. It's still capitalist, but it's not democracy. And I think their objective is to ultimately challenge and revise the rules-based international order to create a Sino-centric world order. And we're opposed to this for obvious reasons. And I think that in terms of Australia's context, we've attempted to pursue to balance between our trading relationship with China versus our strategic and security relationship with the US for some years. That balance point is now becoming impossible because of a series of issues relating to Huawei, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, China's actions in the South China Sea in relation to Taiwan, and various different other issues where we are having to push back against China's actions, and they are not taking it well. The two legal cases you mentioned are just the latest examples in this regard, where you have Australian citizens being arrested on essentially trumped-up charges and then put on trial, and the consequences for those people will be very dire indeed. They are points of concern and points of tension. And as I said at the beginning of this long answer, this is a trend that I don't see changing. I think things are getting worse. In particular, we worry about where China might take things in regards to Taiwan.
Yes, it's actually really interesting to watch Australia's relationship with China, and it almost seems like this is just my personal opinion, that Australia has been the only one really vocally standing up to China. I recall one of your Australian officials came out and said that China is the only international relationship where Australia has to fear the country. So I think, everything that you said is very interesting and very apt too. So do you, in connection with all of this, China is obviously trying to build up some sort of space program. Do you think that space will be militarized in the future, and do you think America's Space Force makes sense or is necessary?
Well, when we talk about the militarization of space, I think it's important to get the terminology correct here, because space has, in actual fact, been militarized since the dawn of the space age. We've had satellites up there that provide support for military activities on Earth in terms of communications, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and more recently with GPS, the ability to do precise navigation and so forth. So space is already militarized in that sense. I think what the focus is on weaponization, to avoid states deploying what's known as anti-satellite weapons, or ASATs, into space that could then threaten other countries' satellites. And that's really where the focus is. It's one of the reasons why the US stood up the US Space Force, because they were seeing what China was doing with these ASATs, and Russia as well. And they felt that they had to be a response to that. Because China has been developing a full range of anti-satellite capabilities over the last few years. They tested an ASAT in 2007, which destroyed one of their satellites, creating a huge field of space debris, and that's still up there, that debris. So I think that there is a real concern about the weaponization of space and where that's headed, and the possibility of not only an arms race in space, but warfare in space. And from the US and Australian perspectives, we have to respond to that in two ways. We're responding firstly through building up our capacity for deterrence, to try and change the decision calculus on the part of the Chinese and the Russians so they choose not to use these weapons. And secondly, through enhancing legal and regulatory arrangements to actually make it possible down the track to have some form of arms control in space, so that we can actually get rid of the most destabilizing counter space capabilities. And I think that's where we're headed at the moment.
Thank you for that response. So related to that, given your extensive experience in this, would you please share your thoughts on the current state of the space competition and how far behind is China relative to US and other countries?
Well, look, I think China's actually catching up in many respects. They've done some pretty impressive missions in recent years. Chang'e 4, Chang'e in particular, and Chang'e 5 going to the moon, with Chang'e 4 landing on the far side of the moon, depositing a rover, the Yutu-2 rover, and then more recently the Zhurong rover on Mars. And they've just started establishing their beginning of their next space station, the Chinese space station, with Tiangong, which is the large core module, and they're going to put more modules up soon. So the Chinese are actually making real headway. They've started out slow, but they're actually accelerating. They clearly have plans for a presence on the moon. The Chinese signed a MOU with the Russians to establish an international lunar research station on the lunar south pole that would be robotic, but would pave the way for taikonauts on the lunar surface, probably by the mid-2030s. At the same time as this is happening, you are seeing the US moving ahead with its Artemis project to return to the moon by this decade. And you're also seeing commercial space activities in the US flourish, with the likes of SpaceX and Blue Origin really making headway on some very innovative technologies in terms of space access. And the goal there is to go to the moon and utilize lunar resources to do some pretty interesting things in terms of space activities. China has picked up on this, and they're now pursuing a commercial space sector of their own. It's still fairly young and inexperienced, and you've had a lot of rockets blow up on the pad, but they're making progress. So to sum this up, I would say that probably by the end of this decade, you will certainly see American and allied astronauts back on the lunar surface. And you'll see the Chinese and the Russians making moves very quickly to join them early in the 2030s. And I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, so it looks like space is the next new frontier. Certainly. So moving on to national technological security, our viewers would love to know what you think about the strategic risk of Huawei, which you mentioned earlier, in general, and more specifically in connection with the ASPI pioneered a report on Huawei's potential security risks. Would you please provide us more details on all of this?
Well, back in 2017, Australia made a decision to not allow Huawei and Tencent to bid for 5G networks in this country. And the concern was that Huawei-based 5G network would allow the Chinese government to have control over critical information infrastructure, i.e. our national communications network. This was deemed to be unacceptable for our national security, and I think rightly so. And so that has created a lot of tension with China. But we've done the right thing in terms of our national security. And I think that other countries have moved down similar paths now. You're seeing in Europe, for example, Huawei being banned for the same reasons. What is needed now is for Western countries to step up and provide alternative 5G and ultimately 6G networks, so that there is an alternative to the big Chinese producers like Huawei and Tencent. And I think that's probably where that competition is headed. But that competition is broader than just 5G networks. There is a field of analysis now in strategic policy called critical and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, nanotechnology, various different other technologies that all have application for military and national security matters. And China has made it very clear in its policy statements that it wants to dominate in these critical and emerging technologies. And that would have a geopolitical implication for the 21st century that would be very significant. If China dominated in AI, for example, it would control economies around the planet. So there is a push, I think, on the part of Western countries to compete with China and to make sure that there is no one country controlling these critical and emerging technologies as they begin to mature.
That's actually a very terrifying thought. So yes, so I guess this is sort of related to what you're talking about, in terms of like alliances, because I know President Joe Biden here in the U.S. He's trying to build alliances with our allies, right? And then China, on the other hand, they're trying to build alliances with their allies. So it seems like they're making moves there. Would you please share your insights on the future of Quad?
The Quad is really important as a development. It had a false start back in 2007, 2008, where it was first established, and then China complained, and our government of the day backed down very quickly. I think that was a mistake, that's what they chose to do. And so the Quad kind of died. It was stillborn. But now it's back. And the Australian government has been a key leader in re-establishing the Quad. For those of your viewers who don't know, the Quad comprises 4 countries, the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. And it's not an Asian NATO in the sense of that European Defence Alliance. It's a dialogue process whereby these 4 countries work together to deal with issues of common interest and to produce outcomes that are useful. There's a Quad Plus, which extends into the ASEAN countries and other countries. But the key point here to understand the Quad is it's a process of dialogue and discussion that ultimately leads to cooperation. So in the most recent Quad meeting between the leaders, there was discussion about, COVID and how we work together on vaccines. So it's not just about defence and national security, it's about a broad range of issues that have included everything from climate change through to space security, through to cyber technologies and critical and emerging technologies. And I think the Quad is really vital in terms of shaping a secure and stable, free and open Indo-Pacific region, particularly as a counterbalance to China's growing power through the Belt and Road Initiative. And in that sense, it plays a vital political and strategic role. And Australia has been, I'm proud to say, a leading proponent of the Quad in its current incarnation.
So sounds like it's more like a diplomatic form of organization and not anything else, right?
Yeah, it's a diplomatic process. We don't have a Quad military alliance like would be the case with NATO. Although the 4 countries do work together in terms of military-to-military relationships and exercises and so forth, it's not done through the Quad. The Quad is about diplomacy and discussion and coming up with common solutions to common problems.
Okay. So speaking of the UN, what are your thoughts about, so there's in America at least, there's a lot of chatter about trying to dismantle the UN because of the whole Security Council issue, and like China always having the veto, or Russia having the veto, and most recently, US had the veto over China, and China was upset about that. So would you be in favor or not in favor of like dismantling the UN and then building something new, perhaps?
I certainly would not be in favor of dismantling the UN or the UN Security Council. I mean, the UN as an organization often doesn't function very effectively. But, it's there. And if we got rid of it, we'd just replace it with something exactly like the UN. What I would be in favor of doing is expanding the UN Security Council to include countries like India and Japan and maybe Brazil and maybe South Africa to give it more balance. The UN Security Council is very much a victor's club from World War II, and I do think it needs to be updated and maybe have an opportunity to rethink the veto option, because I do think veto power can be used destructively rather than constructively. And I think that's what's needed. But getting rid of the UN doesn't achieve anything. All we'd do is we'd replace it with another UN.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right, because the issue is the veto power and not anything else, really. So
I think we could make the UN work more effectively in many areas. I mean, the UN General Assembly, I think, is a bit toothless at times. I was recently involved in discussions on a UN General Assembly Resolution 7536 on responsible behaviour in space. And the mindset that I encountered was, well, we'll just talk about this for 10 years and eventually come out with a resolution. And I said to them, look, counter space technologies are moving ahead in a rapid rate of knots in terms of events are occurring in weeks and months, not years. And so it's the pace of diplomacy that needs to be accelerated to bring useful outcomes. I think that's the key step forward there.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So my last question is a fun one. With all this noise surrounding the sightings of UFOs or UASs in connection with the Pentagon coming out and acknowledging these spacecraft that defy the laws of physics, it seems, from newly released or declassified videos, you and I had a brief discussion on this topic before today, and you noted that even though this topic is fascinating and groundbreaking, no matter what, you don't believe that these UFOs or UASs are extraterrestrial. Rather, you believe that these UFOs/UASs are terrestrial, as in made from materials on this Earth. So would you please elaborate on your thought process on this issue? Because many in our audience are enthralled with this topic.
Well, as am I. Okay, I think it's a really interesting issue. But yeah, look, I think based on the information that I've seen in the 3 videos, which I'm sure some of your viewers are familiar with, Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast, that were released by the military, I'm not seeing evidence that these are alien spacecraft. What I am seeing is the possibility that they are advanced drones or autonomous air vehicles that may in fact not have been produced by the United States. And that in itself is significant because it does mean that probably a peer adversary like China or maybe Russia has stolen a leap ahead in terms of aerodynamic and aerospace capabilities that we should be worried about. So in terms of a terrestrial explanation for these things, that is significant in itself. Having said that, we've only seen 3 videos. There's a lot more information out there. You have President Obama saying, we're seeing things that we can't explain. And, taking it from an astronomical perspective, life exists on this planet. It's evolved into intelligent life, which has developed civilization and technology. That's proof that life can exist. So if life can exist here, it can exist out there. And we're discovering more and more exoplanets every day in terms of, planets beyond our solar system that potentially could harbor life. What we're not discovering so far is evidence of technological civilizations or any evidence whatsoever that these technological civilizations are visiting Earth. So, I'm an optimist when it comes to the search for ET. I think that's an important endeavor, and eventually we will find something out there. But I'm not convinced these are shall we say, the smoking gun that they are here. But let's wait and see what happens. It's an exciting issue, and I think it's important, but we shouldn't just automatically leap to it's aliens.
Well, I just want to geek out for a second because there's, I'm sure you're familiar, or maybe like with the Fermi paradox and the Great Filter theory. So for me, it's very exciting because Earth is a middle-aged planet. So from my understanding, the fact that we're a middle-aged planet and that we haven't yet found life, the theory goes, there must be some sort of mass extinction phenomenon that happens because civilization gets so advanced that even like a terrorist in the Middle East or a domestic terrorist in the U.S. can have access to atomic bomb, plutonium, something that can just blow up the Earth. And that's why we haven't found aliens. So when I first heard about this, when the Pentagon released all this information, I was very excited because I was like, there's hope for us yet. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, obviously I'm familiar with the Great Filter and Fermi paradox. But my favorite is the dark forest theory. If you've read Cixin Liu's 3 Body Problem novels, you'll understand this. The dark forest theory says that there are, imagine the galaxy is like a dark forest where there are predators and there are prey. And the prey keeps very quiet because they don't know who are the predators and who are the prey. So maybe one of the reasons we've yet to encounter intelligent extraterrestrials is because they're out there, but everyone is keeping very quiet because they don't know who are the hostile aliens and who are the friendly aliens. Having said that, yeah, the Great Filter is, I think, is an important idea, and we are facing challenges on this planet that could, lead to that. Climate change being one, the potential for, technological apocalypse if you allow sentient AI to run out of control is another. Nuclear war, in spite of its horrors, wouldn't actually extinguish life on Earth. You would still see civilization recover, but it would just take a very long time. But yes, there are threats out there in terms of that could generate that Great Filter moment for us. And the question in my mind is, are we past our Great Filter or are we approaching it? If we're approaching it, then it will be important if we survive it, because then maybe we can flourish as a civilization, as a spacefaring civilization, and ultimately we then do end up in this sort of Star Trek future where we can have explorations through the galaxy, and maybe then we encounter them. But the laws of physics say, interstellar travel isn't possible. You can't go faster than light. But that's our understanding of the laws of physics now.
Right.
200 years from now, who knows?
Right, who knows? Oh my gosh, this is such the third theory that you pose is such that's fascinating to me. Never even occurred to me that there could be that forest theory and they could be hiding from us. So that's very interesting, and that's something that'll keep me up tonight for sure.
Well, I highly recommend Cixin Liu's Three Body Problem novels. Go and get the trilogy; you'll enjoy them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I will. So, like, with all this space, like the new space news coming out, with all these like new discoveries, this is like your area of expertise. So it must be such an exciting time for you. So in the future, are you going to be working in connection with cyber and like space, or are you going to be gravitating more towards like China relations?
No, look, I see my future very much in the space policy, space security field, whether it's in a think tank environment or back in government or potentially in academia, I'm not sure. But I think that space security and space policy, not just in terms of defense space issues, but broader civil space, involved in this, the government and commercial activities going back to the moon would be fascinating to work in. I'm too old to go to space, but I think that it's a real honour to be able to be involved, particularly for Australia as a new space power, finding its feet in space, to be able to be involved in this moment, to be able to help shape this country's space policy, and help make that dream that so many of us have had of making Australia an actor in space reality.
And just to geek out with you one last time, have you seen this new show that came out on Amazon Prime called The Phenomenon?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen that one.
I highly recommend it because there are these government officials, these PhDs, and these all these people that have captured pictures of these these saucers, and now the government's letting them come out and speak. They have this material that they found that is not made from that with elements that are not made from this earth, and it's very big, but you can lift it up with one hand. And they tried to destroy it with everything we could destroy it with, but they couldn't. So there's actually more. They talk about Area 51. They talk about the fact that even the U.S. presidents don't have access to. There's a higher clearance level than the U.S. president, so they don't even know. So it's a fascinating. I guess documentary. I'm sure you'd be interested in it, and I would love to know after you watch it what your thoughts are. To that question that I was asking previously, where you thought it was extraterrestrial or terrestrial, and maybe your opinion will not change at all. Maybe it's all just crazy talk, but it's still very interesting.
I don't think it's crazy talk. I think that people in my position do have to be cautious about what we say in public about this stuff. I think everyone has an opinion. which I do believe there's extraterrestrial life out there. I'm just not seeing any evidence that it's visited Earth. But that doesn't mean it won't do so in the future. But I do think that what you find with people in my field is that they hold an opinion, but they don't necessarily leap to share it. And, I enjoy science fiction. I think that's important to be able to enjoy that aspect to it. But I think it's important to have a balanced perspective. And the key phrase that I always refer to when I'm thinking about this stuff is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Okay. And so far, I'm not seeing the extraordinary evidence to suggest that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth. But that doesn't mean that the truth isn't out there, to borrow from the X-Files.
Thank you for that. And yes, I completely understand there are some things that you probably can't say because it's kind of a third rail issue for a lot of people, since it's been a conspiracy theory for much of my life, at least, or all of my life.
We can't indulge in conspiracy theories. That would be fatal. So I think it's important to have an objective scientific perspective on this.
Agreed. So that's all the time we have for today. Before we leave, Malcolm, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers, and anything else such as like what you're working on and what we should be expecting from you in the future?
Well, I've got a number of projects on the go in terms of reports that I'm writing on space strategy and the future of air power for the Royal Australian Air Force. I'm always putting out articles on the ASPI Strategist, which is on our website. It's our blog. Once a couple of weeks, an article comes out from me on various different issues. I'm doing many media spots on issues such as space or China-Australia relations or defence in general. So I'm pretty busy in terms of activities, and that's good. And luckily here in Canberra, at least, we're back to working at the office, which is fantastic. So, I think that I just carry on and do the job I love. And there's always fascinating things to work on. I never come to the office thinking, I don't want to be here. There's always something fascinating to work on.
So that sounds fascinating. I am so very happy for you. I think, you deserve all of this good things. And I want to include everything that you mentioned in the description, because I have read a few of your articles and I thought they were fascinating on space and everything. So we will definitely include all of that so our viewers can learn more about Dr. Malcolm Davis. So Dr. Malcolm Davis, it was such a pleasure speaking with you today. I hope to have you back again sometime. I know you're going to be very busy, so we might not have a chance, but hopefully you'll remember us. I will include all of Dr. Malcolm Davis's information in the details below so you can find out more. In the meantime, join us next week right here on Second Gen's Liberated Panda. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. Davis, for joining us today. Goodbye, everyone.